Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and we are back with another full build video. Today we're going to be looking at the Hasegawa 148 scale Macchi C.202 Folgore. Now this kit is kind of I'm checking off a few firsts with this kit for me. And the biggest one is this is my return to a Hasegawa kit in more than 25 years. I had a bad experience with the Hasegawa kit when I was much younger and just kind of decided that they were not good and I was not going to ever build another one. However, a friend of mine from Italy, his name is Alessandro, and he actually has his own YouTube channel called AO Scale Models. He sent this to me as a birthday gift, and it also happened to coincide that he was hosting an Italian group build, so it just worked out that I was able to build this for his group build with the kit that he provided. And so I would like to give a big shout out to him for one, sending me this kit and helping me through the process. I had plenty of questions for him and was constantly bugging him about colors and things like that, as well as a pronunciation guide to actually learn how to pronounce the aircraft correctly. So I hope I did okay, Alessandro, if you're watching. But as you can tell, I decided to add a little bit of aftermarket to this kit. So I have the Eduard photo etch set for the cockpit. I have a quick boost resin air filter, the air intake part, as well as Eduard resin exhaust. And then finally, I have a master mask set by Kit Mask. And that includes masks for the canopy as well as the markings. So jumping into the build here, we're going to start with the cockpit, and we're going to start by modifying the kit parts to accept the photo etch. Now there isn't a ton of photo etch that goes into the cockpit, but there's still a few parts that we do have to prepare so that we can put photo etch on later. And now it's going to be a combination of both like pre-printed as well as just plain photo etch. And so a few of the steps that we do ahead of painting, and then we have to do some other after painting. And now, I'm not quite sure why whatever bad experience I had with the Hasegawa kit 25 years ago really turned me off to this manufacturer. But over the last few years, after being on Instagram and seeing all the amazing work that the other scale modelers do, obviously many of them are going to be Hasegawa kits, and it kind of got me thinking, well, maybe I need to give it another try. Maybe they're really not so bad. Maybe the bad experience that I had was because of my inexperience and lack of knowledge at the time. So I had to do a little bit of self-reflecting, and it really turned out to be a great experience. And I really had fun with this kit, and Hasegawa makes a great kit with this. And it was a lot of fun, not to mention the fact that it was doing a subject that I had zero knowledge of, and it was just something very new. I have never tackled an Italian subject before, and so it was great to start researching this and learning new things that I had just not known before. So it was a fantastic experience. Now you can see some of the parts that we're putting in here for the photo etch. You do have to do a little bit of bending, and there are a couple companies out there that offer different types of bending tools, and that you can do curved bends, corner bends, things like that. And I haven't gotten around to purchasing one yet, just because I feel like they're most of them run in the $30 to $50 range for a good photo etch bending tool. And I just haven't gotten to a point yet where I've come up against a photo etch component that needed something more complex than what I could just do with tweezers. And so that's why I haven't purchased one yet. I'm sure at some point I'm going to come across a situation where it's like, I really wish I had some of the proper photo etch bending tool, but it hasn't happened yet. Now, that's not to say it won't happen, but it very likely could. And another thing I'm going to do in this video, and you're kind of seeing this right now, is trying to show you that I don't get it right all the time or the first time. And the reason why I think that's important to show you is because I I do mess it up often, very often actually. And in the past, my videos, in an effort to try and present you the quote best unquote content possible, usually cut out the parts where, I drop a part, or I just like this little piece of photo etch. I just, for whatever reason, could not get this to stay on where I wanted it to go. But I've come to realize that it's probably better to show my mistakes and how I overcome them than just to pretend like I get it right the first time every time. So there's going to be a few places in this video where you're going to see that I do things, I might mess up a little bit, and hopefully you can see that it's okay. It is okay to mess up. And I think that's one of the things that I wish I could impress upon people who are just getting started in the hobby, is that it's okay to mess up and it's okay to make mistakes, because that's how we learn. And so let me know in the comments the kinds of mistakes that you've learned from, or like a pivotal mistake that you made on a model and you're like, shoot, I can't do that again. I have to do better. Or like, oh, that was a really bad mistake. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make that mistake again. Let me know in the comments when you've had situations like that. I would love to hear your guys's, experiences with messing up. So at this point in the video, we've added all of the photo etch that we're going to add that can get painted. Right now I am removing the gun sight glass because I do want to replace that later, because the photo etch set does give me some photo etch frames for the gun sight, and it will just make the gun sight that much better detailed and not have that huge giant thick piece of plastic that's overly out of scale. And it can, I understand for a lot of people that photo etch, especially at this scale, I mean, these parts are tiny, can be very intimidating. And honestly, the only advice I have to get over that intimidation is to just try it. And like I was just saying, it's okay to make mistakes. And if you mess up your first photo etch, that's all right, because you've now gained experience and you have that tactile knowledge of what not to do. And so you might mess up your first photo etch. You might get too much glue on there. You might glue it into the wrong place. Doesn't matter, because you're trying something new. And I think that's honestly like what's most important. Now, I've gone ahead and prepped all of the cockpit parts for painting, but the undercarriage, the main wheel well, shares a lot of parts kind of with the back of the engine and some plumbing and things like that. So it's a little complex, and so I wanted to make sure that I could at least get the interior of the wheel well area primed before moving on with the rest of the build, just in case I would have trouble trying to prime it later. So right now I'm assembling the parts for the wheel well. Here you can see everything is all ready. Now we can go ahead and start priming. And for this, we're going to be using the Aqueous Black Surfacer by Mr. Hobby. I've really taken a liking to this primer, and I know I've mentioned this in past videos, but I find this primer very, very forgiving and easy to use, and it's not nearly as strong as the regular Mr. Surfacer primer, and so it's a little bit easier to use in my studio without having to worry about stinking up the whole house. And I always have extraction and fans and wear a mask and everything, but because my studio is in the house, I do have concerns about, don't want to stink out the rest of the family. So we're going to go ahead and prime all of the interior parts with the black, give it a nice good solid coat. The interesting thing with the Macchi 202 is that the cockpit is actually open behind the pilot seat into the aft end of the fuselage. So that's why I'm priming a fair amount back into there, just because I don't want any bare plastic to, by chance show through. And you'll also notice that I have a photo etch instrument panel, but you also notice on that stick there I have the kit instrument panel, the plastic part, and that's because I wanted to just try my hand at seeing how well I could build up the kit parts versus the photo etch parts. And I'll give you a little spoiler, it didn't turn out very good. So now I'm going to go ahead and lay down a base coat using this British interior green. Now, this is one of the areas that I had to consult my friend Alessandro, because the interior of the C202 was a color similar to the British interior green, but not quite. And so I ended up using the British interior green as kind of like a slightly darker base. And then Alessandro recommended a very specific paint for me to use for the interior. So I had to wait a little bit to get that ordered in, and then I'll go through and do some highlights with that color. But right now we're just going to go ahead and give everything a nice good solid coat. So here's the actual color that I was recommended to use, and you'll see it's just a little bit lighter than the British interior green, but this allows me to create some nice good color modulation in the cockpit and create a little bit more depth, especially with all the nice detail on the sidewalls and things like that. So the color is basically anti-corrosion green, translated from Italian, and it's really nice, and I really like it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a little modulation on these parts of the interior. Not gonna really see it, but just in case. So at this point, with the airbrushing done, we're gonna go ahead and start picking out some details and doing some hand painting. And for this, I'm using Vallejo model range paints. And I had recently had a conversation with some of my patrons about the idea of brush painting and hand painting. And I think it's one of those skills that modelers tend to not focus on as much. And mainly just because, you want to get good with the airbrush and having a nice smooth finish and good crisp, masking lines and all those kinds of things. And yeah, those are extremely important, especially on the exterior finish of a model. But oftentimes the hand painting stuff kind of gets neglected. So one of the things that I've been doing personally lately is really trying hard to practice my brush painting, my hand painting, so that I can get to a point where I don't necessarily have to rely on things like pre-painted photo etch instrument panels, things like that, where I can feel more confident in my skills. And so again, now there's something that maybe I would like to recommend to the viewers is to get out and practice your brush painting. So with all the painting parts done, we can go ahead and gloss coat everything so that we can seal in and protect our paintwork and move on to doing a little bit of weathering for the cockpit. So we're just giving everything a nice good solid coat, and I'm spraying everything even if I don't necessarily intend to apply weathering to a certain part, but I do that because I want to maintain consistency through all of the parts in a given area. So even though I may not necessarily be like adding a wash to the instrument panel face because it's going to get covered with photo etch, I still want to maintain the consistency of having all the parts have all the necessary steps so they all maintain a similar finish. Now, you've seen me use this wash before, and I've talked about this before being my favorite wash. So the really basic application here is you apply it on. It's somewhat runny, so it's designed to kind of flow into all the crevices and cracks. And once it dries, we're going to go ahead and remove the excess, and it'll leave the wash in the corners, the shadows, the recesses, and it helps create just another layer of depth and a little bit more visual interest for the model. And so we're just going to go ahead and get this all over all the parts, and especially all the visible parts. It's not necessarily to try and get this in like the aft portion of the fuselage that has like a 9.5% chance of actually ever being seen, but really just kind of concentrating on all of the areas that will be visible, because I do plan on having the cockpit open. Now, once it dries, so it takes about, depending on how thick you lay it on, it takes about 25 minutes to dry. And once it does dry, you can just wipe off the excess here. I'm just using a little cotton bud, Q-tip, and as long as you lay down a nice good solid gloss coat, it will just wipe right off. Now, if you do encounter areas that are a little more stubborn to remove the excess, then you can use a little bit of like enamel thinner to help those stubborn areas. But for the most part, you should be able to just remove it and move on. Now, the seat has this really interesting like cushion slash harness setup, and I decided that I wanted to get this installed now so that when I go to do the matte coat, once I'm done with all the weathering, that I'll get this part of the photo etch matte coated as well. And again, it'll just help unify and tie it in. Oh, there we go. Dropped it. And I see, sometimes my fat fingers just don't want to hold on to the photo etch. But that's okay. It's okay to drop things. It's okay to mess things up. It's just interesting the way that the harness is works on this, because you have to like bend it over, and then they have to bend the middle part back up, and then it's got these, instead of having like a cloth belt around the lap, it's got these like chains, like literally like a chain belt, which is just interesting. I have never come across that before, and I find that rather unique. But we can go ahead and get these parts bent now. I've had discussions like this before, but I get that photo etch seatbelts aren't always the most realistic looking. They just don't fold and drape like a real cloth belt would. But I find that the alternative, I mean, you can go out there and get like those HDW, like actual cloth belts that you have to assemble the buckles and everything, and they look amazing. But that is a lot of work. Maybe one day I'll get around to actually giving those a try. But I mean, the alternative is, making your own seatbelts, masking tapes. And I have a video on how to do that. And it can look really good. Again, it's just a lot more work. So it kind of just depends on how much work you want to put into it, how much effort you want to put into it for a set of given results. Personally, for me, I don't mind the seatbelts. I think I like the seatbelts. They have nice detail, and I find them easy enough to apply, but a lot easier than I was trying to get this instrument panel stuck on here. For whatever reason, I just could not. Every time I let go, it wanted to move away from its original position, but eventually I got it. And so we're just going to get that applied on there with super glue. And then one of the things that I like about the Eduard photo etch instrument panels is they make it multi-layered, and it just helps. I mean, it's not as good as having like real good physical relief, but it comes pretty close, all things considered, given the technology and the actual material, and it usually doesn't look too bad. So now we can add on the final layer here. And another nice thing about these Eduard instrument panels is they actually do have like a glossy dot that goes over the actual instrument faces. So they do have a little bit of a shine to it. But because I plan on matte coating over the instrument panel, I will have to add that in later. But just note that most of the instrument panels will have like a slight shininess to the actual instrument faces, which if you can catch it in the right light, it looks pretty good. And not too bad. So we're going to go ahead and get the rest of the instrument panel assembled. There's just a few little tiny like levers that you have to get installed on, and those are still frustrating even to me to try and get those types of things installed. So just be aware. Here we're getting the little straps installed onto the rudder pedals. So nice little detail. I like it. Go ahead and get the seat installed. So it has a rather solid like box that it fits into, so there's no ambiguity about where it goes. And then once we get the actual seat on, then we can finish bending the chains used for the lap belt to try and, give them as natural a pose as possible. And here you can see I'm struggling with trying to grab the end of that bit with my tweezers, but I do eventually get it. But I mean, we can get a fairly decent looking, drape to them. And in the end, I think it works. So with all that done, we can now move on to matte coating everything. So we're going to go ahead and give everything a nice liberal coating of matte coat. This will remove the shine and seal in all of our weathering and generally wrap up doing the cockpit here. So it's and I know if you've watched a lot of my videos, this is probably all like, rinse and repeat, but it's the order of operations that I have found that works best for me, and I like the results. So now we're going to add back in the glossiness to the instrument panels. So I'm using this UV curing clear resin, and we're just going to apply tiny little drops to the instruments faces here using a piece of wire. And it, again, pretty straightforward in how it's done. You do have to be a little careful. If you get too much on there, it might spill out, and then you got to try and clean that up. But there we go. Quite pleased with how those look. And honestly, it takes like 30 seconds to cure underneath the UV lamp, and it's good to go. So now we can start assembling the cockpit and get it ready to install in the fuselage. Now, originally, and you'll see some like glue smudges on the back part of that sidewall. I had thought that I could attach the sidewalls to the inside of the cockpit or to the inside of the fuselage, and then put the bottom half of the cockpit in. But it turns out if you follow the instructions here, they actually are correct. So follow the instructions at this point, install the sidewalls onto the fuselage or the cockpit floor first, and then install the whole unit into the fuselage. You'll get much better fit, and it'll look much better. So I'm installing the instrument panel here, which is normally supposed to fit in these grooves on the side, and the grooves are too large for the actual photo etch part. It's meant for the plastic, so you just have to kind of play around with it, getting it into the right position, but eventually you can get it there. So there you can see a nice good big glue smudge where I'd originally tried to install the sidewall and then quickly realized my mistake and removed it. But fortunately it gets covered when we install the cockpit. Now, the way the cockpit seats in is very nice, very like solid, chunky alignment areas. So there's no question, if you're getting it in correctly, if it's in the right spot. There's really only one way for it to go in, and that's it. So now what I'm going to do is just use a little bit of tape to kind of temporarily hold the fuselage together while the cockpit dries, and so that I can start gluing the fuselage seam. And where possible, like that point, I was actually gluing it from the inside. I find that to be a little bit easier to avoid, getting excess glue on the exterior. Even though, I'm going to be sanding it and cleaning it up, still just the less glue on the exterior, the better, in my opinion. So where I can, I like to glue from the inside. But with that all done, we can go ahead and start working on our seams. And my normal process for dealing with seam lines is to start with a jeweler's file. This will help essentially even out the two halves of the fuselage. If you end up with a little bit of a step, it's pretty rough and it'll cut through this plastic pretty quickly. So you do have to pay attention and be careful. But I find it the fastest way to kind of level things out. And then we're going to switch to this 320 grit sandpaper, and this is going to help do two things. It's going to help refine that seam, as well as remove any kerf marks from the file, and make the rest of the sanding process a little bit easier. I am sanding this dry. You could do this wet if you to try and minimize the amount of dust getting everywhere, but I find for the most application, doing it dry works best at this grit. Now I've moved on to a 400 grit sandpaper, So this is a little bit more fine than the previous one. And this one I am doing wet. I am sanding this one wet. And this is really kind of the start of the polishing process for this seam. Now, depending on how poorly the model fits together, you may have to have some kind of filler on your seam line. Fortunately, with this kit, I don't think I ended up using any filler whatsoever, and that's awesome because that doesn't happen very often. So now I'm using an 800 grit sandpaper, and this is really going to be my final cleanup polish of the plastic. If I was going to be doing like a natural metal finish, I would push this up even higher to like 1200 grit. But because I'm not going to be doing this gets camouflaged, I don't feel like I need to go that high. So at this point we can restore our panel lines that we sanded through, and I'm just using this little razor saw here. This is a Tamiya razor saw. Comes on this interesting little photo etch fret with a couple of different saw shapes. The reason why I liked the curved one is it's really nice for using on a curved surface, and yeah, find it works really well. So now we're just going to go over our rescribed lines with a little bit of Tamiya extra thin, just to knock down any burrs and sharp edges and help it blend in with the rest of the fuselage. So now we can start installing some of the rest of the body panels. This panel, I had trouble getting it to fit properly, but then I was looking at actual pictures of the aircraft, and honestly, on the real thing, it doesn't look like it really fit all that well either. So I was feeling okay with it being a little, just slightly ajar, and it works. I'm good with it. So we're gonna go ahead and get that glued in and get that secure and move on. So at this point, I'm about ready to start closing up the wings and get the wings attached to the fuselage. There are just a few holes you need to drill, so just be aware that you do need to do that before you move on to the next steps, because there's nothing worse than like getting the wings all glued together and then realizing, oh shoot, I needed to drill some holes, and that can always be frustrating. The fit of the wings was very nice and required almost very little sanding and blending to the rest of the fuselage. So props to Hasegawa for that. Fantastic fit here, zero complaints, and really just took very minor cleanup to get it to look nice. One of the things it's got going for it is that the joints were all along known panel lines. So yeah, very, very pleased. So now we can get the upper halves of the wings installed. And now I'm not going to go through the whole sanding and rescribing process on all the parts. I've shown it to you once now. You don't need me to keep repeating it, but I do sand the wings, the leading edges, the wing roots, and where they join the fuselage, just to clean up any of those the seam lines and things like that. Now we can get the lower cowling installed. And again, fit here was really nice, really good, along known panel lines. So very, very good. We can get this little, I'm not quite sure what you would call this, a fairing maybe, that would sit in front of the tail wheel. So get that installed. Here we can bust out the resin air filter intake. So we're going to go ahead and remove this from the casting block with our clippers. Now, in hindsight, this should be done with a razor saw. Because the resin is brittle, I felt confident that clipping it would be okay on this part because the actual air filter itself is pretty chunky, but you'll see later on that I make the same mistake with the exhaust and didn't turn out as good. So I would recommend, it's one of those moments where like, do as I say, not as I do. I would recommend using a razor saw to remove the part rather than clipping it, but I got lucky that it worked out for me. So cleaning up the actual attachment point there to get it ready to install on the aircraft. And now the normal kit part fits into these two holes. The resin part obviously doesn't have the pegs for that, so you just have to kind of get it lined up as close as possible to the correct position, get those holes covered. But the resin part definitely looks much better than the kit part. and much nicer. So now we're going to be getting ready to put the clear parts in for the canopy. So at this point I can get the gun sight glass installed, and which definitely helps. And I'm just using a tiny little piece of clear plastic, but because it's so thin, it just looks much better in scale than the kit part. Plus it's crystal clear, and whereas the kit part was not all that clear. So it definitely helps add much more detail to the kit. The front windscreen gets installed on. Fit here was good, no issues. Test fitting showed that it worked, and so it was easy to get glued on there. So at this point, we can mask up the canopy so that we can start getting ready to paint the aircraft. What's nice about the kit masking set here is that they actually do offer the window masks for both the interior and the exterior, which is nice if you plan to have the canopy open, because I think it just ends up looking better if you can actually paint the inside of the canopy, and it just gives off a much more realistic look, in my opinion. So installing it's pretty simple. You follow the diagram, and you just work through one panel at a time, getting them installed. I am using my tweezers here, my needle point tweezers to get those installed. And as you can see, it's a pretty painless job, and much easier than trying to cut out masks on my own, especially for interior parts. That would be very difficult. So definitely saves a lot of time and energy using the Kit Mask stuff. So huge shout out to Kit Mask. You can check out their website, kitmask.com, and they're always adding new mask sets to their website. So they have a service where you can send them your clear parts, and they will make masks for you, send you the clear parts back, send you a set of their masks, and then they add the mask as a new product to their site. And they're adding new stuff all the time. So be sure to check them out. So at this point, we're gonna break out the aqueous primer again, and we're gonna start priming everything. And this may take you a little while because there's a lot of parts to prime, lots of little pieces that I chose to leave off as separate sub-assemblies, just because it is more of a hassle to have all of these parts separate than it would be to have, I could probably get away with installing half of these parts onto the airplane and painting it, but I was able to foresee a few areas where masking would have been annoying, and so I wanted to try and make the masking as painless as possible. So that's why I ultimately ended up leaving as many parts off as I did. So going through and priming up all these parts does take a little bit of time, but that portion of the effort I think is worth it because it saves me a lot of effort in a few steps later on. Now you'll notice that I have the radio antenna or the radio mast installed just behind the cockpit, and that was a bad idea. I should have left that off because I end up breaking it off. So you'll see in a little while that it just disappears, and I have to get that added on at the very end of the build. But now that we've got everything on, I want to talk a little bit about what I was thinking when I started painting this. Now this has a very unique like leopard spot kind of camouflage, and so in my mind I was thinking, oh, this would be a great idea to paint the whole aircraft green because the spots are green, and then using liquid mask I could apply the spots as liquid mask and then paint over that, and then when I would remove the liquid mask, all of my spots would be there, and it would be super easy and it would look awesome. And so that's what I'm doing here. That was my thought process, and I was really proud of myself for thinking this, and coming up with this idea of like, oh yeah, this will be the easiest way to paint this. I won't have to try and freehand all of these spots with the airbrush and worry about paint consistency and pressure and getting the dots consistent. This was going to solve all of my problems, and it was going to be awesome. So that was what I did. And here we go. And you can see I'm applying the liquid mask. I'm using a really old brush here because this liquid mask will ruin a brush. I haven't found a good way of cleaning it off. So if you do decide to do something like this, or you're using a brush to apply liquid mask, just make sure you're using an old brush. Now I am actually trying to match the spots that are on the instructions. I don't know if they're, super accurate to this specific airframe, but I wanted to try and get as close as I could to replicating the spots as they were in the instructions. And another cool thing about the Italian aircraft is their camouflage actually wrapped around to the underside a little bit, and I think it is a fantastic look. I really like it. So with all of the spots masked, we can go ahead and lay down the next layer of paint. So we're using this desert yellow. And again, I was like thinking, man, this was so easy. This was going to look awesome. And the paint was going down good, getting nice, good coverage going over the green. And I wasn't going to worry about pre-shading. I knew I was going to keep this aircraft somewhat clean. And any weathering I was going to do as a post shade, similar to what I did on the FW190. And so I was just trucking along, feeling really happy, really confident with this, getting this paint on, and feeling good about the Ammo MIG paint going down. It was going down nice and silky smooth, and it wasn't running on me, and it's like literally everything was just going great. So you'll see why I keep talking it up in a minute. But yeah, I was having fun, having a blast, feeling really confident with the build, and just really looking forward to the next steps. So here we go. Now, removing the liquid mask, I use this like really dense rubber thing, it's almost like eraser, but it's not quite. But it's specifically designed for removing liquid mask off of like paintings and things like that. You rub it, and it grips with the liquid mask and pulls it off. But if you're familiar with Italian aircraft, or like this aircraft specifically, maybe you can spot what's wrong. And with all of the research that I did, all the times that I looked at the instructions, that I looked at pictures of the aircraft, the one thing that I never connected in my brain was the fact that the spots on the real aircraft were sprayed on. They did not have a hard edge. And my spots have a very hard edge. And at this point, like, as I was removing this, I was starting to think, like, this doesn't look right. So I ended up freehanding over all the spots to give it a feathered edge. And I ended up using a slightly lighter shade of paint than the original, like, dark green that I used. And so all of that, like, thinking how smart and clever I was at the beginning in order to avoid freehanding the spots, well, I ended up freehanding the spots anyways. So, but I was pleased that had the spots been hard-edged camo in real life, that I would have nailed it, and I would have pulled it off. And I'm not necessarily disappointed that. I mean, I think the technique worked well, and I was really happy with it because it was really simple. It's just that it was the wrong technique for the specific aircraft, and that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes, and I have learned from it, because now I will do much better research when it comes to, how is the camo pattern actually sprayed on the real aircraft. And, checking my instructions more thoroughly and checking my references more thoroughly. So, lessons learned. All right, so at this point, we can move on to the underside. And so, like I said, the camo actually wraps around the leading edges, the wing and the horizontal stabilizers, and as well as the main fuselage. So the only underside color is being applied to the wings and stabilizers, and that's it. But I like... You'll see once the masking is removed that I think it looks really cool, and it's just, again, something new and unique that I haven't done before, and it was a lot of fun to experiment with. So we're gonna go ahead and get this all applied on there, Now, the instructions called for the interior of the wheel well to be sprayed the same color as the underside of the aircraft. I don't know. I couldn't verify one way or another if that's supposed to be correct. That's what I went with, and I think it looks fine. You don't really see the wheel well all that much anyways once the aircraft is completed, but if that's not the case, let me know in the comments down below. But here you can see as we're removing the masking tape, you can see how the camo wraps around the leading edge of the wing. For whatever reason, that does it for me. I really like that, and I'm really pleased with how that looks. Removing the rest of the masking, you do have to be careful that your masking isn't pulling off little parts and pieces and whatnot. So just be aware. At this point, the radio mast is broken, and so I'll have to replace that later. Again, lessons learned. Well, that's actually a lesson that I often don't learn. I've made that mistake more than once. So, try not to do as I do in that case, but it's still a lesson that I have to learn apparently. But at this point, we're just about ready to move on to painting the markings. And excuse me, and I've mentioned this before, and you'll see this painting markings happening more often on the channel as I become more confident in doing it, because I really like the look of painted on markings and not using decals, because as hard as I try to get decals to always like conform and snuggle into every panel line and crevice and rivet, I can't always get it consistent. And so I think painting them on is obviously much more realistic to the full scale versions, and I think just ends up helping the model look a little just slightly that much better. So the painting the markings is going to be a multi-layer thing, and so right now there's a white ID band across the fuselage, and then this white cross on the tail. Now the cross on the tail is supplied as a full decal, and there's an emblem in the center of it. So what you end up having to do if you go this route is you have to carefully cut out the emblem decal from the middle of the full cross decal, because you will need to apply that on. And so make sure you try and get a white that matches the white of the decal so that it blends in. But just be aware that if you do choose to go this route, because this master mask set is available on the Kit Mask website specifically for this kit. So if you end up doing that in the future, just be aware. So at this point, we can start doing the insignias and the aircraft numbers. Now, these masks were very, very tricky because you have really thin lines that you have to get on there. But fortunately, Kit Mask does provide you a few extras just in case you mess one up, because I did mess one up and had to apply one of the extras. But again, very gracious of them to supply you with extras just in case. But once I got them on, the painting process was really straightforward and easy to do. Just go ahead and get some black paint on there. The numbers look fantastic, and really pleased with how they turned out. And overall, I'm really happy with how the insignias turned out. And I think once I remove the masks, you'll see that they look pretty good, especially for how complex and how detailed they are. And it's also nice to only have to paint one color for an insignia. That makes things a little bit easier as well. So now we can go ahead and remove our masking tape and reveal all of our handiwork here. So the masks come off pretty nice, and you can see here just how nice and crisp those numbers turned out. The aircraft numbers there, I think they look great. And I mean, and they're definitely, simple, but at the same time, it really helps. So now we can do the actual insignia here. And I was just, with how difficult they were to install, I'm really pleased with how they turned out. So with all the painting done, we can go ahead and move on to our gloss coat. So just like the interior, this is going to seal in all of our paintwork up to this point and give us a nice glossy surface to do two things. We can install or apply decals over the gloss surface because decals do like to go over a gloss surface better than a matte surface, as well as give us a nice glossy surface for doing a panel wash. So there are a number of emblems that we have to apply as decals here. That would have just been way too complex and difficult to do as paint masks, at least beyond my skill. Not saying that it's impossible, but beyond what I could do at this point here. And so we're going ahead and get these on. There's also a few like stencil decals that we'll need to apply as well, just to round that out. But decals are going on, pretty straightforward. I had no complaints or issues with the Hasegawa decals. They performed as I would expect decals to perform. So yeah, again, they went down good, and I have no complaints. So we're gonna go ahead and get the rest of the decals applied, and I'm gonna take a pause real quickly while I take a drink. Fortunately, there weren't too many stencil decals, and the ones that were there were pretty straightforward. So, but I do like the little bits of red. They kind of just help add some more pop of color that contrast with the rest of the aircraft. And now with the decals on, we're going to go ahead and give everything a nice coat of Solvaset. Now this is a decal setting solution, and its purpose is to help the decal conform and really adhere to the surface of the model, and hopefully, like, you know, conform to all of the details and recesses and things like that. Solvaset is pretty hot in the sense that if you apply too much or too many coats, it literally could just melt your decals, and trust me, that's a bad day. But in moderation, I find it one of the better setting solutions to use. So now we can, at this point, I'm just building up the propeller hub. I did most of that work off camera, but pretty straightforward. Go ahead and get this all installed. I do like the system that Hasegawa uses, where it has like really good positive, locating spots for them, so that you know exactly what pitch the propeller blades are supposed to go in, and what direction. So no ambiguity there. Right now we're just giving it another light coat of gloss clear to cover up all of our decals, seal those in, and now we can move on to weathering. So for the weathering, we're going to keep it relatively simple. We're going to do a wash of the panel lines. This is something that I just enjoy doing, and I like the look of it. It pleases me aesthetically. And then we'll do a little bit of like oils and post shading as well. But just like with the interior, we apply the wash all over, really just concentrating on getting it into panel lines, recesses, corners, things like that. And then once it dries, we can wipe it off. And you can be as, you can try and be as precise as you want, really just trying to get the wash in the panel line and nowhere else. You could just completely slather the whole thing. It just depends on how quickly you want to go through your supply of wash. So I kind of find it's a middle ground. But you can see here that wiping it off, so this is just a dry paper towel. There's no thinner on this. There's nothing on there. You can see how easily and effortlessly the excess wash wipes away, leaving a nice panel line there. And I think it looks really good. Really pleased with how it looks. So we're just going to go ahead and get the whole thing wiped down. Now you might run into areas where it's hard to get the wash removed with the paper towel. So there you can definitely move to using some Q-tips, and even just like I've also used like a little corner of paper towel in my tweezers before to really get into like tight corners and things like that. So whatever you find works. And then, like I mentioned before, if you do run into any really stubborn areas where the wash just doesn't want to come off, a little bit of enamel thinner will pick it right off, and you'll be good to go. So we go over the entire aircraft, get all that wash removed, and at this point I'm really pleased with how it's looking, and there's no more things we need to do with the gloss coat. So at this point we can move on to our final matte coat here and seal in all that work. So I like to apply the majority of my weathering over the final matte coat, because especially if I'm using oils, what I like is the slight difference in sheen that you get when you're applying oils over a matte coat. And so what that means is like you might just catch the airplane at just the right angle where the dirt and grime buildup has a slightly different reflective sheen to it than like the skin of the aircraft. And I feel like it just helps add some nice texture to the airplane, to the model, and ends up just looking really a little bit of visual interest there. So with the final matte coat done, at this point it's safe to remove the window masking because I'm not going to be doing any more like overcoats and spraying that would affect the actual clear parts here. And also by removing the masking, I can do a little bit of a few more pieces of installation in the cockpit that I left off just to make the masking easier in the first place. So we can get this cockpit part installed here, and again, it took me a little while to kind of get that in there correctly, but got it in there. We can install the radiator. So I like the way that Hasegawa has designed this, and this is one of those areas where I mentioned before the reason why I left it separate was because masking of the radiator housing was going to be really complex had I not left it off, and so it's just ultimately way easier to leave it, to have it as a separate part, to paint it and mask it separately than to have it on. So now we're going to do a little bit of post shading. So I'm using the Outlaw Paints black here, and this is thinned. This is like 95% thinner, really, really light, and it's almost imperceptible as I'm applying it, but it's once I'm done, you kind of notice the slight shadow to the area, and really what I'm trying to do is concentrate these on high traffic areas, so the wing root, around the engine panels, around the the nose panels where they would have been servicing and rearming the guns, things like that, where you would have just a little bit more buildup of grime and wear from the ground crew. But places like the horizontal stabilizers where you're just not going to get that level of traffic, I wasn't so as concerned of getting that there. But again, this is really, really heavily thinned and diluted because I wasn't trying to go super heavy on the weathering. Keep it light, keep it simple, but just show enough to show a little bit of wear. And so going around all these little patches and hatches, on the wing and around the fuselage here where ground crew would be up and walking on it. Pretty straightforward. So this is similar to what I did on the FW190, just not nearly as extensive. I did that one a little bit heavier on the 190 than I do on this one, and at this point I'm going to start doing the exhaust. So now I'm still using the same black, but I have added a little bit more paint to the mix. So now I'm probably about 70% thinner, and this will help me build up a nice good soot layer for the exhaust. And looking at reference pictures, the exhaust staining was very similar to that of like the BF109, which makes sense because they both use that inverted V engine. So that was nice to be able to find some good reference pictures for that. Do a little bit of sooting around the gun exhaust ports there. Again, usually don't find that often, but I do find that it looks cool. And now we're going to add just a little bit of gray to the exhaust to represent that, the octane in the fuel, the lead in the fuel. And this, we're just really going super thin. You really can't even tell I'm applying it. And you see I'm constantly, I'm like applying a little bit and then I'm checking it, applying a little bit, checking it. This is just to make sure that I'm not going too far. And, because that's always the thing is you only realize you go too far after you've gone too far. So I try to preempt it a little bit. So at this point, we're going to add a little bit of oil paints here. This is going to help me do some oil stains and, leaks and things like that along the underside of the aircraft. And so really what I'm just doing here is applying little dots of oil paint and then using this nice large soft brush that's loaded up with thinner to gently pull that paint back and create that streaking effect. And and I can keep adding more and more layers to it to help build up to the levels that I want. And then on the upper surface, we're just going to add a little bit of dirt. The ground crews would be getting up there, the pilot would be getting up there, whatever. And as careful as they may be, they're still going to, attract a little bit of dirt from the ground, from their boots. It's going to mix with whatever, oils or greases might be on the aircraft and create just a little bit of a patina to the aircraft. But again, I'm trying to keep it concentrated close to the areas where ground crew would be, where I would assume they would be moving around the most. And I find that it's fairly common across all aircraft and nations where the ground crew is going to be servicing their airplanes. So you can kind of get a sense that the ground crew is going to be working around these areas because that's where the pilot is, that's where the engine is, that's where the guns are, that's where all their service hatches are. So usually can infer a lot of things. So at this point, we can start getting everything all put together here. The Macchi's landing gear is interesting because it has like this, I'm not even quite sure what the term is for it, but like a double clasp around the wheel as opposed to just having like one, the axle attached to just one part of the landing gear. This wraps around the landing gear, but it does mean that you can, if you're careful, you can actually make it so the wheels, can rotate, which makes it helpful for trying to like get the flat spot of the bottom of the tire just the right spot. You can actually move it around here, get the tail wheel installed. So these were all hand painted off camera. And there's a handle on the inside of the canopy that I kind of decided later in the build that I wanted to add because I was going to have the canopy open. I thought, well, there should be a mechanism for opening the canopy. So just using a little bit of super glue and little bits of wire, I am creating the little handle so like the pilot would like lift it up and then it would rotate and release the canopy so the canopy could lay over to the side. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and get that painted up, get those little details painted on there. So, because this will be pretty prominent, and then we can move on to doing a little bit of chipping. And I'm just doing this by brush. Sponge chipping is also a good technique, but it's not very precise. Sponge chipping is good if you need to like chip a piece of armor plate on a tank or something, or you're doing a lot of chipping across a large area. But I really wanted to minimize the amount of chipping I was doing on this and really concentrate to very specific areas. And in that instance, sponge chipping just you just don't have the control of it. So we're going to go ahead and get the prop installed here. So this just slots on. And I don't necessarily worry about having like rotating props on my kits. That's not something that's important to me, but a lot of kits are designed to be able to have the prop be movable. This one is no exception. So landing gear doors can go on, and these all locate and fit just nicely. I had no issues getting these on. The little trouble is trying to get these like actuators installed because they have to fit into a small hole on the back wall of the wing spar in the landing gear wheel well, and then go up to meet the landing gear door. So that was a little fiddly trying to get those installed, but the actual fit was very nice, and they fit where once you got them in, they were good, they were solid. And landing gear had absolutely great attachment point, like solid. It only goes in one way, no ambiguity. Really don't have to worry about like alignment or anything because that connecting peg was just big solid square chunk. So more props to Hasegawa. That worked out really nicely. Getting these actuators installed, again, just like on the landing gear doors, kind of fiddly because you have to maneuver it just right under some other parts and then get it into the wing spar and then onto the actual landing gear itself. So this took a couple of dry runs to get it, and then and then get it installed. I do find it's best to do it while the landing gear is still soft, because just like you saw there is a little bit of play in there before you can get it aligned nice. So I found that that's the most helpful, but your mileage may vary. But here you can see the landing gear fully attached now, and definitely looks the part. Very pleased with it. There are a couple more doors that we do have to get installed here, and these just slot in. And in hindsight, I think I should have replaced these with thinner plastic, because they're literally just flat, featureless rectangles. But hindsight, 2020 and all that. This tiny little detail here gets installed. I couldn't tell you what this little part does, what it is, but it's supposed to be there according to the instructions. So we're going to get that installed. And what's interesting is there's actually two parts that I missed installing onto the fuselage, because the instructions don't tell you to install them until the very last step, which was just really frustrating to me, because they're they're just tiny little parts that go on like the side of the fuselage. You're probably not going to miss them, but it's just annoying that the instructions don't have you put them on until the absolutely very end, when they should have been much earlier in the instructions when you're actually building the fuselage of the aircraft. So that's probably my biggest complaint with this whole kit, was just the way that they did that. So I painted up the exhaust, but here you can see I'm only installing part of the exhaust. Here's the second part of the exhaust, and that's because I used my clippers to snip them out when I should have been using a saw, and I ended up breaking them. And I broke both sets of exhaust in the exact same spot. So I don't know if that's like a weakness in the resin, but I found it interesting that they literally broke in the exact same spot. But again, do as I say, not as I do. Use a razor saw when removing those parts from the casting block. Don't use your clippers. You'll save yourself a tiny little bit of headache. So now we're going to go ahead and get the canopy, or the canopy installed. And so we're just using a little bit of our extra thin there on the ledge, and we're just going to get this hang on. So this hinges over, very similar to the BF-109, and there would be a small cable that would keep the canopy from completely opening all the way to the side of the fuselage. So we're just going to represent that with a tiny little bit of wire here, and this just gets super glued on. Now you do have to be careful when using super glues around clear parts, because if it's not properly ventilated, as the super glue dries, it does off gas a little bit, and that off gassing can cause like a cloudiness on clear parts. So just be aware of that. Like, I try to avoid using super glues when all possible around clear parts, just because I don't ever want to, it's just, that's something that I like to avoid. So now the final step is going to be to install the radio lines. So here I'm just using some Easy Line, and I drilled a tiny little hole into the very leading edge of the tail that we can insert our Easy Line into with a little bit of super glue. Get that in there, and then for the purposes of using the super glue with the Easy Line, I am also using an accelerant to make sure that the super glue dries as quickly as possible. And so that's what I'm applying there. That's a little bit of accelerant. So that helps to almost instantly set the super glue. And I find it makes it a little bit easier when doing the Easy Line. Now, if you're not familiar with Easy Line as a product, what's nice is it's actually a nylon thread. So it has some stretchiness to it, which is great for scale modeling because it allows for actual tension to be in the line. And additionally, it doesn't have like the frayed hairs that like a string would have, for example. And so it's obviously purpose made for scale modeling, and it's one of those products that does exactly what it's supposed to do extremely well. And so I would recommend, because like this spool of Easy Line will easily last me for a long time, and it's definitely worth the investment. So now we're going to get the final bit of the line installed there, just like that. And then really the next step here is to paint the insulators. So the wires would have insulators to help protect them from, the metal of the aircraft, make them better at doing their job. I've seen other people represent the insulators with actual physical parts. I haven't gotten there yet, but one day. So we are all done with the Hasegawa 148 scale Macchi C.202 Folgore. And I just had such a blast with this kit. And this was one of those projects where I blew through this in a couple of weeks because I was just having so much fun. I couldn't put it down. I would literally go to bed thinking about it, what I was going to do the next day. It's just, that's how much I enjoyed it. So once again, I need to give a huge thank you to Alessandro from Ale Scale Models for sending me this kit for my birthday. That was very kind and generous of him, and for helping me through the whole process, for giving me tips and pointers and color references and all of that. It was a great collaboration. So I'm going to leave a link to his channel down below. I would recommend you go check him out. He's a very talented modeler and does some amazing work. And so I hope he appreciates this. I hope he likes it. I hope it lives up to his Italian heritage. So, and I've got some Italian heritage long in my past as well. So we'll kind of meet there in the middle a little bit. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you continue to enjoy the longer format video here. I have a lot of fun doing it, and I've been seeing a lot of success from the longer format videos. So let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. Let me know if I missed something, or if I didn't do something right, or what you think. I like interacting with you. I welcome the feedback, both, constructive criticism and everything. Send it to me. Let me know. If you just want to say hi, just say hi. I'm good with that too. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider subscribing. And I usually have at least one video every week, if not two, and really try hard to maintain a good content schedule. And if you really like what I do and you want to help support the channel, head on over to my Patreon. I'll leave the link down below. If you want to see up-to-date work in progress pictures of the projects that I'm working on, head on over to my Instagram. I post there a couple times a week. And yeah, thank you for watching if you've made this far. I would like to give a very huge shout out to my patrons. They really help support this channel and help me to bring content like this to you. So thank you to all of them. Thank you for watching, and we will see you on the next video. Cheers.